Memory is pretty selective. When it comes to the good old days, it leaves out a lot of the not so good. I'll be right back. Not so long ago, I found myself in a discussion concerning the state of the world with some young people, including my own children. Strangely enough, it wasn't old Dad who was nostalgic about the good old days and sour about today's world. No, it was the now generation who were pessimistic about where we are and where we're going. They also seemed resentful toward me because I'd known that other world of yesterday when life was simple and good with joy on every hand. Before I knew it, my memory machine was functioning the way it's supposed to on a psychiatrist's couch, dredging up particulars, not just the rosy nostalgia that comes to mind when you hear an old song. Now, don't get me wrong. My memories are pretty happy, and I enjoy closing my eyes now and then for a rerun or two. But I also find life exciting and good today, in truth better in most respects. I looked at these young people and wanted them to feel good about the world they've inherited. They'd already covered such things as present-day pollution, our grasping materialism, and the commercial rip-off in modern-day merchandising. So for a little while they heard about the old nightly chore of banking the coal furnace, that shoveling ashes on the fire to keep the coals alive through the night, the cold early morning journey to the basement to shake the grate, uncover the embers and shovel in coal, and dressing in the shivering cold while you waited for the house to warm. As for their worry about air pollution, they were reminded that in the earlier times every chimney in town belched black smoke and soot every day from fall till summer. Having been born in a small country town, I could also tell them of that nighttime walk through the snow to that little wooden building out back of the house, a journey repeated in the morning. Summer brought the flies incubated in those outhouses, and there was an outhouse for every home, store, and public building. I went on about the apple barrel in the cellar, the ice box, the lack of fresh vegetables in winter. But let me go back a century or more so this won't be just a personalized trip down memory lane. Dr. John J. McKetta, chairman of the National Air Quality Commission, has written an essay which helps set the record straight on pollution and related subjects. In passing, he gives a capsule description of the really good old days about 150 years ago. For one thing, he says, life was short. Life expectancy for males was 38 years. It was a hard 38 years, too, for the work week was 72 hours. For women, it was even worse. Their household chores ran to about a 98-hour week. They scrubbed floors by hand, made clothes the same way, brought in firewood, cooked in heavy iron pots, and fought off insects without pesticides. There were no fresh vegetables except in their season of ripening, so vitamin deficiency diseases were common. Epidemics were an annual occurrence and usually claimed the life of someone in the family. If we think water pollution is a problem now, it was deadly then. One typhoid epidemic in Philadelphia caused by polluted water carried off 1/5 of the population. It was a time when most people never traveled more than 20 miles from their birthplace, never heard an orchestra or saw a play. As Dr. McKetta says, perhaps the simple life was not so simple. Because we've all been treated to so much misinformation about pollution, I'm going to give you some more of the facts the doctor has collected in the next couple of days. I think you'll be surprised and relieved. He says and proves that we're not on the brink of ecological disaster. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. Is murderous man responsible for all the endangered species, those birds and animals seemingly slated for extinction? I'll be right back. I don't think any of us can hear of an endangered species of wildlife without feeling regret and a sense of guilt that mankind has brought this about. Most of us will never actually see a tiger in his jungle home or an elephant in the wilds of Africa, but we enjoy just knowing they're there. There are plenty of people today working hard to preserve the remaining few of those species on the endangered list, and I'm all for them. There are also many who are not going to rest until they've saddled all of mankind with a great guilt complex for being the murderer of all sorts of innocent creatures of field and stream. Yesterday, I gave you some information collected by the chairman of the National Air Quality Commission. Well, it seems his work with the commission took him into the field of disappearing animal species. His conclusion was that while it's possible that in some instances man may hasten the disappearance of a species, he really has very little to do with it and cannot be held responsible. About 50 species are expected to disappear during this century, just as 50 species disappeared in the last century, and the one before that, and the one before that, and so on back for 3 billion years. During all that time, 100 million species of plant and animal life have become extinct, and man had nothing to do with it. We're relative newcomers on Earth and obviously couldn't have played a part in the disappearance of millions of creatures that existed before we even arrived here. In fact, the Commission chairman points out that in spite of our all-out war against certain undesirable insects over countless years, we've failed to eliminate a single species. And that brought him to another bit of surprising knowledge. We may have jumped the gun in eliminating DDT and other chlorinated compounds which supposedly endanger mankind as well as some bird species by thinning their eggshells. It seems the experiments which led to this action were conducted in a manner that led to no positive conclusions. I recall when I was governor, a professor in our university's agricultural campus at Davis, California, used to lecture against doing away with DDT, and dramatized his lecture by swallowing a spoonful of pure DDT. The last I knew, he was still hale and hearty. Now we learn that on balance, the attributes of DDT may strongly outweigh its harmful effects. For starters, there is Dr. Borlaug, who won a Nobel Prize for developing a new strain of wheat which can double food production per acre. Now that's quite something in a world threatened by famine. He says if DDT is banned by the United States, his life work is wasted. He has dedicated his life to finding better methods of feeding the world's starving people. Without DDT and other important chemicals, he says, that goal is unattainable. According to the World Health Organization, DDT has had a miraculous impact on arresting insect-borne diseases and increasing yield from grain fields once ravaged by insects. Malaria deaths dropped from 4 million a year to 1 million because of DDT. Similar declines were shown in encephalitis and yellow fever. It is estimated that 100 million people who would have died of these diseases are alive today. By the way, recent tests have indicated the thinning eggshells could have been caused by mercury compounds rather than DDT. Tomorrow we'll get down to the doctor's findings on air pollution. It might surprise some of the doom and gloom criers. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. Apparently, we don't have to look for another world to move to just yet. We aren't going to smother in smog or run out of clean water. I'll be right back. All of us are concerned about the environment, and I'm sure none of us wants to be remembered by our children and our grandchildren as having left them a ravaged, polluted planetary garbage dump. For 2 days now, I've been talking about the findings of the chairman of the National Air Quality Commission, Dr. John McKetta. He's presented facts that put the matter of air pollution in a new perspective. If you've been reading that we're seriously depleting our oxygen and replacing it with toxic substances such as carbon monoxide, you may be as pleasantly surprised as he says he was. In the first place, the theory we've long accepted that all our oxygen is created by growing green things is not true. The evidence, according to the doctor, is overwhelming that the sun, cosmic rays, and water vapor in the upper atmosphere is the source. The supply of oxygen in the atmosphere is virtually unlimited and is not threatened by man in any significant way. We know that automobile exhaust throws 270 million tons of carbon monoxide into the air every year, and it has a life in dry air of about 3 years. Yet measurements show there is no increase at all in the concentration of carbon monoxide in our air. In Los Angeles, where there is a real smog problem, the carbon monoxide concentration reaches as much as 35 parts per million. Without Los Angeles' air inversion layer and geographic situation, that figure would probably be only 1.5 parts per million. Obviously, Los Angeles does have a problem. But hear this. The carbon monoxide content of cigarette smoke is 42,000 parts per million. In a stuffy room where a number of people are smoking, the concentration is from 3 to 5 times as great as it is on a Los Angeles street on the worst day. To sum up on carbon monoxide, the doctor reports that in the broad expanse of our natural air, carbon monoxide levels are totally safe for human beings. Now, before someone sets up a howl that I'm advocating an end to our fight for less air pollution, that isn't true at all. I want the bluest sky we can get and the purest air, and I know that our cities can be made much more pleasant and less smelly. But it seems to me we can carry on the campaign to do this without a sense of panic that clouds our judgment and leads to costly mistakes. Right now, our main effort is directed toward oxides of nitrogen, which come out of the automobile tailpipe and cause the photochemical reactions which color the air a muddy brown. There's no question they're a problem in areas such as Los Angeles, where there's a more or less constant temperature inversion trapping the air. But Dr. McKetta lists the findings in this field as his number 3 shock and surprise. Nature, it seems, also produces oxides of nitrogen. As a matter of fact, nature produces 97% of them. If we could successfully eliminate 100% of all the man-produced polluting oxides of nitrogen, we'd still have 97% of what we presently have. He adds that sometimes he thinks nature must be laughing at us. He proves the possibility of that last observation with this astounding fact. The late Dr. William Pecora has calculated that all the man-made air pollution since the first man appeared on Earth and up to the present totals less than the amount of particulate and noxious gases thrown into the air by just 3 volcanic eruptions: Krakatoa, Java, 1883, Mount Katmai, Alaska, 1912, and Hekla, Iceland, in 1974. We should have a law against volcanoes. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening.